Okay, we'll get started with the preliminaries. Welcome back to the 2021 Careers Open Day sponsored by Ocado. This next section features two speakers from Atkins, Tim and Beth. I'll leave the introductions to them as they get on. We're going to split it 50-50 between Tim and Beth and have a little bit of question and answer after each one. If you want to submit your questions, do so through the Q&A function through the bottom of at the bottom of the screen. And then we'll do it again after the end of Beth's section 2. So Tim, over to you. Off you go.
Thank you very much. So I was asked to, if I could give a sort of career story about my career in operational research and how I came to be involved. From the point of view that somebody, well, I wouldn't like to say I'm nearing the end of my career. You probably see the 50 badge behind me in the background to give you an idea of where I am. I hope I've got many years of doing something like this left, but I'm 28 years in now. So what I thought I would do would be, sorry, I need to find the screen share button again on this, would be to give you an idea and talk about myself and my career first of all, but I'll come into, before I hand over to Beth, who will give you much more recent and up-to-date experience, I'll talk a little bit about my current work at Atkins as well. Just to save you listening to me, if you know that I've just put together sort of what I've done and what I've done over the last 30 years more, and some of the key highlights there. So like many people coming to OR, I started out doing a maths degree, wondering what the most relevant, useful things I could do with that were. I was keen on computing and programming and analysis, but not really into the engineering side of things and sort of the hard, what you call applied mathematics, I guess. Came across operational research in the careers department, looking through brochures. The first thing I did was to write off lots and lots of letters to organisations that had OR groups at the time, and internal operational research groups were still fairly common, looking for summer placement jobs. I was quite lucky that we were in the midst of a recession at the time. I was quite lucky that of maybe 20 letters I wrote, probably one of the only responses I got was from the Bank of England, which had a tiny OR group of 3 people. And I worked there over the summer of 1991. It was an excellent place to work, partly because I got to go into Threadneedle Street every day through marble corridors and past people in posh waistcoats. But I also got to grips with the idea that we were doing banknote modeling. Basically, I was trying to find out whether it was possible to predict the point at which the peak demand for £5 or £10 notes would happen, because at that time, there were probably like 70% of transactions were in cash, printing banknotes and having enough, and they only lasted about 6 months at the time because they were paper. So predicting how many you would want to print was very important. I remember having one chart from an article of the spread of cash transactions, of how many cash transactions at each value. I'm having to copy that down and turn it into a curve in a spreadsheet, which was Lotus 123 in those days, the very latest thing, and then being able to create a little model within the spreadsheet, which would use the value of RPI, retail price index, changing through time to predict how many notes of each type you would need, given the transactions and the purchases people were making. So it's a very simplistic idea, but it turned out to be quite powerful, and you could actually track how many of each note, and when. I remember a big debate was, when will the £5 note become not worth having anymore, and or not worth printing as many, and they need more £10 notes and then more £20 notes over time. So it's a nice little practical thing. I then went, I didn't put this on here actually, but I then went to Lancaster University to do the Masters in Operational Research for a year. Had a great time there, learning about all sorts of other similar applications. I remember linear programming was a big thing at the time. Programming in C++, and doing various courses. But the sort of career really started when I joined the Post Office Counters research group, and at that time, Post Office Counters, I guess as it is still now, was a separate business within the Post Office alongside Royal Mail, and they had a research group which combined market research and operational research, which was about 40 people at the time, which was, you know, it had grown over a few years through the process the Post Office were going through of basically changing their culture to be basically to make decisions on an analytical basis. They were going away from, you know, old men in suits in meeting rooms making decisions based on what they thought was right, to really underpinning with analysis. So we did market research about customer perception, dealing with things like really trying to understand why customers in queues got irritated because one queue was moving faster than another, and what types of system wouldn't make that perceived to be fairer. I worked on postal orders for a long time, trying to understand who was buying postal orders and doing focus groups with them, but also doing a lot of programming. I bought the I actually was responsible for buying the first GIS, Geographical Information System, within Post Office Counters. It got delivered to me on Christmas Eve in 1994, and it was my best Christmas present. I got to install MapInfo and use that at a time when we just didn't have, you know, we were doing maps by writing scripts before that. So I then did a lot of post office location analysis, particularly looking at whether there were enough post offices and how far people lived from them, and being able to process data to show and demonstrate that the network that the post office had at the time was reaching further than any other retail or banking network could in the country. And so they just didn't have they knew they had a lot of post offices, but they didn't know precisely what it meant to have those post offices there and being near the customers. So after a few years of that, I moved into Thames Water. I was interested to get into more environmental work, and I moved into Thames Water, which was a very much more traditional OR group, which looked a lot at modelling of the water treatment processes. So I was involved in looking at the reasons, the frequency with which you had to refresh filtration systems in water treatment. Lots of things about trying to get into biology, about the life cycles of the bugs that actually do some of the filtration in some of the systems. Visiting water treatment plants all around London, and seeing how they worked and getting a feeling for the water supply. Leakage was the big thing in those days, though, and I think it's still pretty big. If I'm doing this sort of talk live and I can actually see people, which I can't at the moment, so I'm just talking to I can only see Beth at the moment, who's smiling, so that probably means I'm not talking complete rubbish, hopefully. But if I had live people, I'd probably ask you what you thought the leakage rates were and how we estimated them. And the process was really interesting there of how you started to you could understand leakage, because there was inaccuracy in the measurement of the actual amount of water being coming through the treatment plants, being abstracted going through the treatment plants, and there were variations in readings and many different pipes with different readings, but absolutely no way of being certain about how much water was coming out of people's taps, because most houses weren't metered. So trying to estimate how much water was lost on the way was truly an estimate. It came out to about 40% at the time, which still seems a shockingly high figure. So then I quite quickly sort of moved through that, because I got very interested in the strategic planning aspect then, because of the leakage side and how much we needed to be investing in water supply for the future, and understanding the demand, and how did you understand the population, and what they would need to, how much water they would need in future, based on population growth, based on lifestyles such as dishwashers and garden watering and all the things that use them up, and how much that varied. So got involved in looking at the case for major reservoir being built, which was never built, but then that's planning for you and doing these things. Often you work on something and you find that the outcome is the thing you've spent a lot of time thinking about. The decision is, no, we shouldn't do that. And I learned through that you should always mark that as being a success if you've informed the decision, even if the decision is no. Particularly pertinent with working in transport and on highways these days, because often I work on road schemes that the answer is no, and that can obviously be a good thing, can be a bad thing for people who would have benefited from shorter journey times. But so that was Thames Water. I'd always wanted to get into transport, and I had the opportunity after that to join what had been the British Rail OR group, which was like one of the strongest traditional OR groups that existed for many years. It had been privatized, so it had been sold off to a company called AEA, which interestingly was the Atomic Energy Authority's technology wing, which had been privatized just before then bought British Rail's OR group. And that formed a really strong technology and all sorts of consultancy activities within the railways. As you'd expect, there was a lot of things which were to do with scheduling and timetable buildings for trains. We were going through a transition at the time from trying to see whether we could integrate functions of planning within the rail industry, where revenue and passenger demand planning and the timetables for that had been done very much separately from understanding the capacity of the infrastructure, so signals and how many trains could you get down a particular track. And there was an initiative then to build a single system that allowed everybody to look at to be planning the passenger demand with an eye to using the capacity of the whole railway. There were some aspects of that worked really well, but one thing it certainly told me was that doing that was a lot more complex than it first saw. All sorts of factors started to come out, which were very much, I guess, were human factors about who knew what and how certain the data about the track capacity was and the signal placements, because a lot of it wasn't held in the form we needed. So what you expected to be a very easy thing to determine actually turned out to be very hard. And if you built a computer system around optimizing with poor data about the infrastructure, then you couldn't optimize anything. You had to have perfect data to run a heuristic approach. So I mean, this is, I guess, I mean, with the Thames Water thing, this is where I started to get very much involved in it. Get to notice that a lot of my work was really comparing the supply of a utility or or a commodity, with the demand and understanding spatially where the supply was for water and where people were living, where people were working, where they needed to travel to as part of the rail work. And that's been a theme then. It was particularly evident when I was working with crowding on commuter trains within the rail industry. We had a nice little model. I've written a LinkedIn article about this recently, a model called Plato, which was used to look at when people wanted to travel into work in London and the trains available and what decisions they would make. And it could show that basically you could have extreme crowding on the most popular trains, but if you designed the timetable well and you understand the stopping patterns and where people were living and where they were bored, you could actually optimize to some extent to smooth out the demand. But the one thing you couldn't do was avoid standing on the most popular trains, because the more you did to expand the capacity of the most popular trains, the more people would move from other times to say, oh yeah, I don't mind standing up on that train that's now got some space and I'm not crammed in completely. I'll move from my half empty 8 o'clock train to my 8:45 train and fill that back up again. But then that could become very efficient. So if you didn't understand these sort of simple rules that decisions people were making, you could plan a very inefficient system when you were thinking you could get rid of crowding, which wasn't possible. And again, that's a theme that comes up in road building all of the time, that you can expand road capacity at pinch points, but it fills up again if it's where people want to drive, and trying to understand the big picture for that. So I left the rail industry when I really wanted to stand back even further from that and understand how land use and transport fitted together. And at the time, WSP had a group which was working on land use and transport modelling together, which was a very sort of theoretical approach, but very successful, and has underpinned a lot of the Department for Transport's approaches over the last 20-30 years. These things have been done, and I started working on modelling for Cambridgeshire particularly, and have worked now for 15 years on various modelling approaches to look at travel demand within Cambridgeshire. And really it's continuous with my work at Atkins, because I've moved firms, but not necessarily jobs in that sense. So I work now building similar models after having done the Cambridgeshire one for Bristol and Bath, North Wales, North Hampshire. We've done some work overseas in various countries such as Turkey, building models that connect the idea of where people live, where they work, where they go to school, etc., with the travel demand that they have. What do they need in terms of travel to fill their daily lives, and how that relates to the transport system. And finally, I guess what we've got into, well, it's been underlying things for a long time, is working out how that can support the path towards net zero. How do we manage the fact that car journeys for some people are inevitable, for other people are optional, and we need to move towards more and more of them seeing it as optional or seeing more sustainable modes. A lot of transport modelling has effectively been highway modelling for a long time, but I'm quite proud that the modelling I've done over 15 years has tended to be truly multimodal. So we're always putting in there the other options and making sure that we understand, is the potential for walking and cycling here? How will that interact with the choice to use a bus versus driving, and the problems you have that often your good intentions to say put a cycle route in, thinking people might drive less. Often you take bus users and turn them into cyclists. So very nice and healthy, but it's not necessarily getting people out of cars. So we're trying to find ways to think about that. And then there's automation. We're increasingly doing doing automation of the processes that we use. We're using Python, a lovely tool called Jupyter Notebooks. We're putting a lot of systems online for our clients to actually look through themselves and be able to help us understand whether the data is meaningful. We're producing entire technical reports using systems, again linked to Jupyter Notebooks, which allow you to put your data into spreadsheets or in scripting files, and then load them directly into a Word document, which then has which then will have interactive parts in it, where you don't just see a chart, you actually see a movable chart that you can flip around and zoom in and choose different things to see, or you see a map that's interactive within the report. And that's very exciting, because we're starting to really learn how to communicate with interactive tools, and make that data really sing, which is great. So we're more and more looking for people who want to apply those sorts of digital skills, want to do that, but want to do it within the context of what's a really interesting problem. And I've stayed in transport for the last 15 years after moving around, because basically there is no more interesting problem to look at, and very rewarding one. I think I'll pause there to see if there's any questions at all, or anybody wants to ask
nothing coming through yet, Tim, but let me ask you one. If you had to pick out one, or it might be two projects, which would you describe as your favorite one to work on, and which was most successful?
My favorite, I have really fond memories of running scripts over a weekend when I was at the post office, where we were asked the question of how many people live within 2 miles of a post office, and we had like 3 days to do it for a senior board meeting, where someone was meeting with a minister and they wanted to say this, and nobody knew, and we had to work out a way to run scripts and this was written in Pascal at the time, I think, to go through the entire postcode database with populations and compare it to post office locations and compile how many people live within 2 miles of a post office. And we had to split it up between, it was such a big problem to run, we had to split it up between 4 different, there are either 386 or 486 PCs. To get it to run over a weekend, and someone going in to restart things that had crashed. So that was just a challenge where you had to think on your feet to think the best way to do it. So that was good. What was most successful? I think I might go back to what I said previously about, often when you work on an investment, the analysis says, yeah, don't do that, that's not such a good idea. And I won't say any specifics, but sometimes you're really proud that you managed to get people to say no to something. And I think that's one of the major things. In terms of positives, I think within Cambridgeshire we've influenced, this is quite tricky because not everyone sees it this way, but we've influenced decisions on planning that put housing in the right place, that prevent people from just building housing where it's convenient for the developers to do it. And we've been able to say, no, you'll get a lot more benefit if you put those houses there. And typically that's making places accessible. And we've really influenced that across Cambridgeshire. So I'm really proud of that.
A question has just popped in, and it may be related to what you've just said. Out of curiosity, is there a particular project in mind that you felt had a really significant impact, more so than other projects?
Yeah, again, I don't want to talk specifics too much about that, though. I'll talk about something abstract. When we were doing, or that I was less directly involved in, going way back. If you think about the times when in the 90s, when we were looking at when schemes like the Jubilee Line extension were being planned, or development of Canary Wharf. Some of the models that we were using at WSP were used for that and gave warnings about the problems that were going to really big strategic stuff, again saying, you know, essentially the justification that if Canary Wharf was ever going to work, then you needed the Jubilee Line extension. And you know, that's pretty impactful that it was supporting that, to say, look, you can't do this style of development unless you get that transport connection right. So I think there's a lot of that, but I think the biggest influence is yet to come, because again we've got to get net zero there, and we've got to show what can be done and what can't be done. So it's sort of an exciting time. I'm not looking back and saying, right, that it's the time to be really talking to clients to understand what's achievable in terms of net zero, and make sure that they're doing the things that will make the biggest difference.
Great, thank you. That seems like an ideal point to swap our presenters. So thanks very much for your section, Tim.
Thanks.
We have chance for some more general questions later on, but
yeah,
let's hand over to Beth.
Thank you.
Yep, I'm just going to try sharing my screen. So can you see some slides?
Yes, we can.
See if I can click on. Okay, so I'm Beth. I am a consultant, and I sit within Atkins in our aerospace, defence, security and technology business. So that's ADS&T. I studied maths at university. I did an undergraduate in maths, and then I actually went off to go and do an operational research master's. So I've been probably where a lot of you are. I've been exactly there. And I finished that in 2017. So about 4 years ago now, and I've been with Atkins ever since. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you kind of through my career story. The whole entire time has been at Atkins, and kind of take you through the different stages I have been in it. So I started as a summer placement student. I did my dissertation kind of for my master's alongside Atkins. I actually joined the transportation division to start with, so where Tim sits, before coming over to ADS&T in February 2020. So you can see the kind of titles I've taken on through here in my last 4 years, and I'm going to focus in on each of these now. So my summer placement, I did this in 2017, and this is where I completed my kind of dissertation on automation and forecasting of accident analysis. So that's road traffic collisions, as they're now called, rather than accidents. And my university, the University of Southampton, we had the opportunity to do our dissertation aligned with business. This is kind of to help solve a business problem while having the operational research focus. I actually already had a job with Atkins, so I decided to reach out to them and see if I could align with them, and I had this opportunity come up. So I was looking at some kind of, well, different ways to forecast the accident. So looking at whether a regression model would work, a linear one, a polynomial one, all of those kind of things, and also actually just doing some analysis on it. So where are the accident hotspots? Are there, looking at the difference between on a motorway where you may have less accidents but they're more severe, or on the kind of maybe some more country roads or quieter roads, and how that changes so that when we're looking at road schemes, we can take that into account. I really enjoyed this opportunity because it meant I had an introduction to working in that professional environment, but actually, as much as I delivered value to kind of future projects, the main benefit was I was accountable for my own dissertation. So it was a really nice kind of introduction. It meant I got to know the people that I was going to be working with in the future. I could kind of start attending team meetings beforehand, all of those kind of things that are really useful to know. So I had about a 2-week break, handed in my dissertation. I think it was at the start of September, and started as a graduate transport planner. I think it was like the 14th of September, so a couple of weeks later. I joined what was known as an economics and business case, and kind of became aligned with this technical area as we evolved and kind of became a kind of more, I don't know how you'd call it, we became an early careers team, so it was easier to try lots of different things rather than being aligned to a specific area. What kind of the economics side of that means is doing a lot of cost benefit analysis of transport schemes. So on the right there, I have the M25 junction 10, which I did a fair amount of work on. And you're looking at kind of transport user benefits, so things like travel time, reduction in collisions. You can look at things like driver stress, and all of these, and trying to monetize them to build a case for implementing the transport scheme. There's kind of Department for Transport tools that are already available for this, and there's times when we did kind of more bespoke analysis to come up with this kind of monetization. I also had the chance to kind of look at or do some work in other areas, so things like transport strategy, and then the transport modelling that Tim was talking about. I was doing a little bit of that at the same time. After about 1.5 years, I kind of moved on to being an assistant transport planner, which essentially means I was kind of taking on more responsibility with projects. Had the opportunity to lead training sessions, both in the UK, and then I also went to India to go and deliver training over there and to kind of help. We were trying to build an economics team over in our India office, so to help them have the skills and kind of actually know people. It's always nice to get to know people. While over there was some really interesting roadworks going on. I mean, you can see the bottom right there, absolutely nothing around that, and that was just in the middle of quite a busy road. But yeah, that was a really good opportunity, and something that they used to have, obviously at the moment it's slightly different, is you had an opportunity to go and do a secondment out in India, which is a really good way to integrate with the team out there, try new experiences, gain an understanding of how they work. So when you come back to the UK and you're working alongside the India office, you have an understanding of how their day works, they're 4.5 hours ahead of us, their culture, things like that. So it's really good. I also started to kind of do some project management, taking on a small project, and then also kind of being an assistant PM for a regional transport model, and leading on economics for various different projects. So it was a really, while also gaining my technical skills, I was starting to be kind of trusted and given the opportunity to show my leadership and management skills. In February 2020, I transferred over to our ADS&T business, and this was a decision where I wanted to use some slightly more bespoke operational research tools and develop my consultancy skills to go alongside that. And I joined on for the last 6 months of their graduate scheme, and had the opportunity to work in a variety of clients. I've worked with the Cabinet Office, the Ministry of Defence. I was able to take part in a SCAF challenge, which is the Society of Costing, Analysis and Forecasting. And this involved looking at the kind of cost for 10 years of running an electric vehicle for a family of 4. So really interesting way to learn about costing and how we can build that up, what kind of tools we can use to help us do that. This is a rather strange time for me, as I joined in February 2020, and then, I mean, not 6 weeks later, we went into lockdown. So I had to build my network remotely, which is slightly more challenging. You don't have the opportunity to just pop to the kitchen pod over here, someone talking about running, cycling, I don't know, whatever you're interested in, and to kind of tag on and make those connections that way. So I needed a much more proactive approach to all of that. But I managed to build my network and managed to kind of graduate our junior consultant scheme and become what we refer to as a consultant 1. And this was last October, where I have now kind of started to gain skills in cost modelling, working with a client in the MOD. And I've been able to work towards my Chartered Management Consultant Award, but also as I did quite a bit of time in transport planning, I've been able to continue to maintain my professional development scheme and keep a record of what I have learned in that time. Because if I ever want to go back to that domain or reach into those skill sets, I have a record of what I've done. I've completed a fair amount of training courses, so I've done core consultancy skills, looking at things like how we go into a client, how we go about the contracting, and how we should kind of exit a project. As well as doing a women's development program and technical training on things like business analysis, requirements engineering, building better business cases. So I've had the opportunity to do a lot here. A lot of my time being a consultant, I worked on one project. So it was really nice to have those variations with the trainings to allow me to develop in that time. Actually just a month or 2 ago, I was promoted to a consultant 2, as we know it, and this has kind of allowed me to take on additional responsibility, so doing some line management for our junior consultants. So if you applied in ADS&T where you would come in, I have now started line managing some of those, and also taking on mentoring roles for some of the other junior consultants coming through the scheme, particularly those who are interested in the kind of operational research or numerical logical analysis roles. I have been given the opportunity to develop a lot of business case experience in a new industry. It's a really sought after skill at the moment in our domain, and to have that opportunity and to be trusted to kind of go out there into the client and develop as I go is really kind of valued for me. I've also had the chance to lead events for both internal and client away days. So this is kind of when we go and have networking opportunity, we learn about what's going on in the business. We can learn about other projects within our client. Last week, I was at the Aerospace Museum in Bristol, which is where we hosted our internal away day, and it was a really great day, a really good venue, and I had the opportunity to go onto the Concorde, which is always very exciting. I've put there, who knows where I'm going to go next. There's so many opportunities that I can go and take on, which is what I really value about working at a kind of company like this. I mean, I've come from transportation and I'm now working in the defence industry at the moment. So and I've worked in central government. So there's loads of different ways you can go, and that's something that I really value about my job. I was going to touch quickly on kind of life at Atkins and what it's like working in a consultancy for operational research. So some of our kind of main skills that we need is our technical excellence. So for you guys, that's kind of your logical, numerical, analytical skills that we kind of draw on to solve our problems. Being a confident communicator, quite often our clients may not actually understand the technical side of what we're doing. So it's being able to communicate the solutions and the answers that you're coming to and how you've got to them in a concise and clear way for them. And being self-motivated, but I guess it's relatively self-explanatory. People are the main asset in consultancy. We sell people, we actually don't manufacture anything. So there's a really good drive. And as I said, I've had the opportunity to do lots of training courses because that's what we sell, people. So they want us to be well-developed, well-rounded people. It's client-driven work. As much as we do occasionally work on internal projects, most of our work is through client work, and that's where we make our kind of money, it's where we make our profit. And there can be times when it's uncertain. A key example is we used to do a lot of work with Heathrow, doing their security kiosks and modelling how people would queue through the system and how they move through the system using tools such as Simulate, and then doing lots of data analysis on it. When COVID hit, that completely stopped. Heathrow did not have the money to do those kind of projects. So there's a little bit of uncertainty around things like that. It's all starting to pick up again now, actually, and we've even started to expand to the Manchester Airport Group and looking at their kind of kiosk modelling and queuing systems. Even when we have work, there's peaks and troughs, especially when you're starting to think about clients' financial year ends. When we're working in approvals, we have to consider the end of the financial year, and actually that's when quite a lot of budgets are kind of set for. So we have peaks and troughs coming and going in our work. And obviously we're very client focused. One of the main things we have to do is keep the client happy. We're trying to solve their problems. Sometimes they have an answer in mind and it's not the answer, not the right answer, not the answer we would suggest. So it's managing those kind of things, making sure we're in regular contact with them and ensuring they're on board. I was just gonna, development and training. So this is something that I've experienced. We've got kind of developing towards specific charterships. So I work towards a management consultancy chartership at the moment. There's a really good active graduate community within your offices and I guess within the kind of wider UK. Mentoring and buddy schemes. So I said I'm part of a kind of mentoring role, and then I also have a mentor. So these are things that are really valued within Atkins. And then obviously your kind of standards with your social events, new starter induction, and also the possibilities for rotations, secondments, cross business projects and job swaps. So like I said before, I have moved from transportation to ADS&T, and there's opportunities to go over to India on secondment, go elsewhere. I know people who have worked kind of out in Dubai. We have cross-business projects, so maybe slightly controversially HS2 Atkins work on, and that's kind of across F&G, so our kind of one of our, I guess, divisions, and then transportation and AS&T. So there's loads of opportunities like that to work across the whole entire company. I was just going to quickly touch on the application process. It's fairly standard situational judgment test, and there's so many you can choose from. I went through this about 4 years ago, and it's fairly similar. Obviously, at the moment, it's slightly different because we're doing online assessment centres and business interviews, but as you would expect, the same kind of thing. These are the two kind of related grad schemes for operational research and I guess data-driven places. There's a transport planning one, there's also a kind of transport planning data one, and then we have our management consultancy scheme where you can choose to go down a kind of cost modelling and analysis route as opposed to maybe a project management route. And all of these are on our exhibition pages as well. So I guess that's all I really had to say. If you want to kind of follow us and ask any questions, then yeah, come and see our exhibitors stand or online stand, book a meeting in, and we'll happily talk to you.
Great, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Beth. A couple of questions coming through, but I'll start with my own. What about your favourite project? What have you enjoyed most?
That's really hard. I mean, I've worked on quite a lot of projects. Actually, I worked on a project when I was over in transportation on a business case for a new junction, and I drove past it a couple of weeks ago, and I went to my partner. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I worked on that. That's so exciting!" And being able to see it actually being built was and having input into that. So I think that's probably one of my favourite things I've done so far.
And it sounds like they listened to your advice.
Yes, hopefully. We'll see when the junction's finished being built.
Next time you're stuck in traffic there, you might think otherwise.
Yes.
Okay, this is one that Tim has answered by typing the answer in, but let's ask it again to get your views too. Mm-hmm. Would you say that doing an OR Masters is necessary to get into the field, or would it be doable to just have a maths degree?
I think I wouldn't say it's necessary, exactly the same as kind of Tim has said. It's nice, and having the mathematical background is just showing that you have the logical and numerical side. So that's kind of the main thing that from a business modelling and analysis side we look for is you can develop a lot of skills as you go along, and a lot of what we do is the application of things. So you can pick that up as you go along. So I think it's one of those things where it's slightly more common, like Tim said, to do it now, and therefore it does put you kind of a level up, but it's not a necessary thing. And if you're a good candidate, then you'll be assessed on that.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that from a general point of view too. I think having a master's makes you more employable, and so perhaps higher up the picking list, perhaps, but it's certainly possible to do so without the master's degree. Definitely a tricky decision about whether to make that investment, but yeah, certainly doesn't rule anything out, does it?
Yeah, I mean, we're really happy either way in terms of master's degrees. I mean, a lot of people coming in to our area have sort of engineering backgrounds, but I'm particularly keen that we get more people who are either have a master's degree or have the sort of the general numeric background and simply the interest in problem solving in these areas, because complementing with different skills is really where it's at for me. That I work with a lot of people who are specialist career transport planners or civil engineers as well, to different disciplines. But what we're finding more and more is mixing them with people who are modelers, computer scientists, data scientists, and the OR for me sits into that sweet bit in the middle where you're communicating on both sides, and that's where it's great. So it's bringing that that way of thinking into things, and wherever you've got that from, or whether we can help you sort of get into the way of thinking, that's all good, really.
Okay, we've got another question popped in. We've got a partial question, so if the person that tried to do that would have another go at that, that would be useful. Okay, the second one, I'm looking at the transport modeler and data analysis role, and under the candidate information it says development, application and documentation of macro modeling using software like Saturn ME/2. Question, really, how familiar do you need to be with these sort of packages?
Yeah, no, you don't need to be familiar with those packages. I mean, it's nice if you were, then that's great. But the vast majority of people that we take on will not have training in those, and we bring that. We deliver what we reckon to try and deliver 70% of our training needs within projects, which we think is good for the people and good as a way to do it. And we'll regularly be taking. It's one of the actually one of the things I enjoy most. I don't do a lot of training in Saturn specific packages, but taking people and saying, okay, this is what we're doing, and being able to take people up a learning curve is all part of what we do. So yeah, bring the skills, bring the attitude, bring the interest, and we'll supply the domain knowledge that you need.
I didn't have any experience in any transport modelling software when I started, and by the end of it, I knew it quite well. When I ended up moving over, there's things that we kind of said about buddying and mentoring. You'll find that actually sometimes you'll almost in your home office have someone who knows it very well, and you can just go to them, pick up the phone. There are kind of formal training courses as well in Saturn. Yeah. So yeah, the best way to learn sometimes is just by doing it and running a model and being like, oh, that's not right, I'm going to do it kind of again. So
yeah,
and I think
hands-on but supported.
Yeah.
Any experience in that kind of data handling, data analysis, programming is useful for whatever job you're going for in this kind of field.
Yeah, yeah.
One thing I'm not sure I picked up when you were talking about, but how many people do you have across the business who are in this kind of role?
You do your bit, Beth.
I'd say within our area of the business, so in aerospace, ADS&T, aerospace, defence, security and technology. That's why we shortened it. It's just such a mouthful. There's probably about 20 of us at the moment, but it's something we're really trying to expand on. We have seen quite a lot of client demand for it. So, and there's areas of operational research that we haven't quite tapped into yet, and that we know there's client demand of, so we're trying to recruit those capabilities as well as developing them internally. So we're at about 20 at the moment.
Yeah, on the transport modelling side, we reckon to be overall for transport modelling the biggest team in the country at about 100, with about another 20 or 30 in our global technical centre in Bangalore. Which, by the way, if anybody who's sort of watching this from overseas, opportunities to go and work in to work in Bangalore, if that's where you're based, that suits you. We have an office in Dubai as well that's associated with this sort of thing. But of those, probably half all the time are highway modelers who may be more design and engineering focused. But what we're seeing, again, with the net zero world upon us, the focus on highways and highway design is going to shift, and the focus much more on how do people travel, why do they travel, what are the alternatives that people do to traveling, such as sitting here. We're almost talking about access planning, including online activities now. And so I think we'll be shifting much more into the mindset that we need to be more bespoke in our approaches, and more of those people will be, you know, will be in OR style roles in future. This is out of I think 300 transport planners, and 100 of them are transport modelers, which is quite a high proportion as well. The transport planners doing the planning applications and development proposals, and a lot of urban design work. So you know, we're quite a strong force within transport in Atkins.
Great. Well, nothing more coming through at the moment. We're running towards the end of our allotted time, so I'd like to thank you both for your time and your contribution. Some really interesting stuff there, and some great opportunities for working at Atkins. I think Beth mentioned that you've got more information at your exhibitor booth via the platform, so I'd encourage folk to go and visit that and the other exhibitors too. The schedule now is there's a half-an-hour break between the end of this talk and the start of the next one at 3 o'clock. So do go away, have a little bit of a break, but go back to visiting the platform and talking with people about the opportunities. So thanks again both, and thanks everyone for attending and listening. Cheerio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.